Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're going to talk with someone who gets to connect deeply and close up with animals through a lens of wildlife protection and conservation, a photographer's lens to be exact. Kristoff Druva from Denver, Colorado is with us today, and he is the man behind Kristoff Druva Photography. Kristoff has been using his camera for storytelling in an effort to protect wildlife and nature. He has traveled extensively throughout the U.S. and has experienced a diverse range of wildlife habitats. And when you check out his work, like me, you will probably wonder, how does he get so close to these animals? Kristoff works directly with conservation nonprofits to help create awareness around the sensitivity of wildlife habitats. He is someone who is using his passion for nature and wildlife to do and spread good around the planet. Kristoff, welcome to the campfire.
Thank you so much, Scott. Happy to be here.
Man, I am so excited. You know, we were just chatting a little bit before we hit the record button here. We're talking about some of my favorite recent photos that you posted, and so many of them are bears. I mean, big, like what most people might think of scary bears. But I was just commenting to you, like these pictures are so good. If I was like a little bit younger and a little more naive, like you make them into these creatures that I just want to run up and like put my arms around and hug and snuggle with. And like, what amazing creatures. How do you do this?
Believe me, I go through the same exact thing while I'm photographing. There's moments where I'm like, that bear, like a little cub will be walking right past, and it's like, how do I pet this without dying? So you just don't pet it. But yeah, no, I love getting to know the animal itself, and getting close up to it is what I do to hopefully inspire people to want to protect more of the wildlife that's out there in the world. So,
oh my gosh, it's so good. And we're going to get into this. I guess just for starters, people absolutely need to go to your website and your Instagram to see the photography that you've put out to the world to see. It truly amazing stuff. Kristoff, how did you get into wildlife and nature photography?
Well, I moved out to Colorado in beginning of 2019 area, and I had never photographed before, but always loved, animals. Like I watched Steve Irwin when I was a kid growing up. Nice. And Animal Planet, of course, it's like, that's kind of where it all stems from, I think, originally. But photography itself started as landscape when I moved to Colorado, just because the mountains were too beautiful to not photograph after camping or during camping trips. So it kind of went from that. And then I got to hang out with some groups of people that we would shoot fall colors in Colorado. And that was around 2020, fall of 2020. And then after that, I really started kind of getting into this like wildlife obsession, like photographing wildlife, getting really out into nature alone. The biggest thing that drove me to like push into wildlife was, outside of loving the animals, was I just really love my alone time with nature. And that's probably where I would say it all started. So
yeah, I wonder if we could dig into that just a little bit, because you called it this wildlife obsession. It almost seems like this. I mean, and this isn't that long ago. You said, this is like 2020. I mean, it's pretty recent. Like,
yeah.
Was there like a trigger that created this wildlife obsession?
A trigger? I don't know. It's I'm trying to think of the first thing. The first time I shot wildlife, I was photographing my dogs actually running around the dog park, because I wanted to like get more, involved in like action photography.
Yeah.
And then across the dog park area, there was a coyote that popped out of the snowy area, and it was like a gully, and it came out, and I started photographing it, and I was like, oh, I need a longer lens. And then it like literally just kind of snowballed into, oh, I need to photograph more wildlife and do that. So I really just got so hooked on that. And then after the shutdown from COVID, it allowed me, my work shut down for months, and it allowed me to travel a lot more. And, it was kind of a blessing in disguise for me to jumpstart or kickstart my photography career. And that's where I started, really, was during that time. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So this coyote, like, that's interesting. It's almost like this kind of happened by accident with this coyote. You're just hanging out with your dog.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got huskies and I'm like, oh, wolves, like they're so, pretty. But then, a real, like a wild coyote popped out, and it was, that was kind of, I think, the big start of where I could, like, when I could trace it back in my mind, that's where I trace it back to.
I love it. That's awesome. So the other thing that you mentioned was sort of like recognizing that you're grateful and appreciate your time alone.
Yeah.
So can you, can you talk about that? Like, what's kind of the thing there?
Well, overall, I'm very social. I'm very outgoing. I love talking to people. I love making friends. I do love that. Like in my day-to-day life, that's who I am. If you hung out with me, we have Halloween parties every year. We have Christmas parties for people that don't have like a Christmas party to go to, like out of town. So we're very social people, me and my fiance, and sorry, my fiance and I. But I think when I get out into nature, it becomes like a very, I don't know, I don't want to say selfish, but I become very just like, I draw into myself, and
Yeah.
instead of like having to think about, how to take care of someone else or people or make other people excited or happy in that sense, I just get to let it all kind of go. And then I really just get to be out in nature. I think like the travel side of me too also loves that part of it, where I get to see things that, photographing wildlife too, especially, it brings you to places that most people will never go. You go deep into the woods, you're following game trails, hoping you don't get lost on the way back or attacked by something, being very careful. But it's all a very freeing experience, I guess. It's for me.
Yeah, I love it. So I want to ask one more question, because this podcast is all about listening to the voice inside that calls us to adventure and following that sort of inner voice. And you just said something. I just wonder if you could describe, you said, I draw into myself. And I just wonder if you could describe what that means and what that feels like.
It's it's a great feeling. So when I'm out there, like I'm thinking about what subject am I going for, and that's it. Like there's nothing, and surviving, basic survival. But outside of that, like every worry I have is just like all any sort of like fear or stress that's going on, and like in the normal day-to-day world for me is completely gone. And it really does, like, it's very freeing. I sleep like a baby on a night that I come back from, like, a photography night where I'm out in the woods. I come back and I just sleep like a baby. Just no worries at all. So it's really that's probably the main thing.
I love it. I'm picking up like a strong focus, like a presence, and then like you probably heard the term flow. Like it almost feels like you're in this sort of flow state.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible. Yeah, I really whenever I talk to people about photography, or if they're asking about getting into it, or especially wildlife too, because that is where I'm so passionate about it. But even just nature photography in general, it's like I try to tell people, like, go out and do it. If you're even thinking about it, like it's a life-changing experience, honestly. And it's like camping, like people that are avid campers or avid hikers. It's like it's that freedom that just becomes so addicting, honestly.
Yeah, the freedom. I love this. Have you always been a photographer?
I haven't. No, I only started shooting in literally like end of 2019, actually. Yeah. So that's when I started with like portraiture in Denver to make some money. And then it just really escalated into landscapes because of where I was living. So
what did life look like before photography for you?
Before photography, I did a lot of things. I was, when I was younger, I was a mechanic and in bands and stuff. So I worked for Audi as a technician for years. And while I did that, I was in bands, and we would like tour either the Midwest, because I was based out of Minnesota then, or lived in Minnesota then. So we'd tour like the Midwest, and then that traveling started turning into like traveling the country. And after that, I went into car sales for a little bit, but got it back out of it, and then became a fitness instructor. So I've kind of lived like a lot of weird lives, and in there is snuck in there, like randomly, I converted a school bus at one point, and then and now I've converted a second school bus, which is the one that I took up to Alaska summer of 2023, and I spent all summer up in a school bus that I converted into the tiny house. So yeah,
That's amazing. It sounds like Into the Wild right there.
kind of. Hopefully not be how it ended, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
that's so cool. So I'm curious because it's really inspiring. Like you just got into photography in 2019, and I mean, really, like the photography is so amazing. It's really inspiring to see like how that's developed in such a short period of time for you.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm curious, like what was the learning curve like for you?
You know, when I get in, when I'm like really passionate about something, I put everything into it. You know, my
Yeah.
credit card companies love me because you know, I buy too much than I can afford, you
Yeah.
know, or more than I can afford sometimes. But honestly, like it's more of a I loved it so much that I couldn't do anything but dive in, you know, as much as I could. And
Yeah.
it's one of those sayings that like a lot of photographers and videographers really, and it really kind of applies to anything in life, is like if you like the only way to get better is to do it, you know, and just keep doing it and practice and practice and practice. And I've been, you know, as much time as I can spend and I can afford to spend to go drive to places, because obviously gas is so much, but like whenever I can go somewhere and photograph wildlife, even if it's locally, like I try to find fox dens around me all the time and coyote dens, and it's that's really the biggest thing. It's just as much time as I can spend, like when I'm
Yeah.
not working and not having that like family time,
Yeah.
I'm out shooting as much as I can. So
Do you feel like you found your calling in this?
I really do. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting because there's no, you know, wildlife photography is like one of those things that's hard to make a full career out of, honestly, and it takes
Sure.
it takes a lot of time away from home, you know, honestly, and that's a balance. I'm still, you know, it's every day, every year,
Sure.
every week is a little different, you know, from, you know, having that conversation, making sure that everything is, you know, communicated properly between my fiance and myself, and just like being okay with that. And yeah, no, it's yeah, it's been great, but it's hard, but you know, it just takes that time. So
Understood. Totally
yeah.
understood. So your website says that as a photographer, you're using your camera to tell a story in order to protect wildlife and the natural world. Just
Yeah.
curious if you could tell us a little bit about what that means.
It kind of goes back to, you know, what I was saying at the very beginning. I can't remember if we were on yet or not, but it was you know, I love showing how, you know, you were talking about how adorable these animals are and like
Yeah.
how it's hard to like not pet them or like make people want to pet them.
Right.
But like truly that's what I want to do. I don't want to send a message that you should pet them, but I want it to be like apparent that, you know, these animals, like you watch them for long enough and they are like they're like dogs, they're like people, like they have personalities. They're like one cub is so different from its sibling, or like another family is so different from the other. They're louder. Like an example is that I don't know, I can't remember if we were recording yet, but basically there's this little cub I have a photo of, and it's a second year cub, and its mom would catch fish for it, bring it over, eat some, share it, blah blah blah, and most of the time it was fine. But after a little bit, there was this family, a mom and her two cubs, and she's been around the block a little bit more, so she's definitely a little bit older of a sow, and her two cubs are like, she would catch a fish and they would start screaming at her. Like, I'm not even kidding. I have like a video of them like yelling at her, like growling, talking. And it's so funny because the other cub never would do that with the mom, but these two cubs will like yell at the mom. And then after she's done feeding them or giving them their food, uh, later that night, those two cubs, specifically one of them, was like a total jerk, and he would literally run up to that other family, like not his sibling but the other mom and cub that are a totally different family, and she would catch a fish for her cub. This little one would just run over and take it from the other cub and then run back to mom, and she'd have to like defend him, like, and be like, don't come over here, this isn't yours anymore. So it's super funny. Like, it's just like family antics. Honestly, it's hilarious to watch.
So the way I love it, the way you describe this, though, it's almost like you're hanging out, they're hanging out. Like this doesn't seem like these are like chance crossings. You're telling this story as though you're like watching a whole day in the life.
Yeah, yeah. There's parts in Alaska, Lake Clark, you know, Cody, or sometimes Kodiak, like Lake Clark, Katmai, stuff like that, where there's a lot of areas where these bears they've seen plenty of people at this point, so they're not as like upset. But the biggest thing is that these coastal bears in Alaska, more so than interior bears that are more often than not called, they're grizzly bears.
Yeah.
Kodiak, Lake Clark, I mean, they all have these coastal brown bears that are much more chill with people. And because they're well fed, they're not really hunting for food. They're usually foraging for berries or catching fish. So they're not the hunting bears that I would never get within the same distance of a true grizzly bear as I do with a coastal brown bear. So
Okay.
that's a very big thing. That's like a very big distinction I have to make, is that when I'm in interior anywhere and there's a bear, I'm way more distanced. I'm way more on edge. I'm way more aware of my surroundings. Not that you don't have to be with bears everywhere, but it's just a very different experience. So being with them while they're doing these things it's very much a plan. Like, I'll go to the spot where there's a salmon run coming and I know there's going to be bears there coming in. So you go wait for them, and then they come in and then they just do their thing. And it's amazing.
Yeah. So one of the things that like, I'm just so amazed that, like, I don't know what kind of equipment. I'm not, when it comes to photography, I'm clueless. Like, I don't know how close the photographer makes, or the camera makes it look like you're getting. But I mean, some of these pictures, it looks like you're right up next to them. Like, how do you get so close, and how close are you actually?
So it depends on the photo, and it depends on the subject. Like I was saying, the coastal brown bears are some of the bigger animals that you can actually get very close to and feel pretty safe around. Safe's a relative term. I've been bluff charged a couple times from them, and you just have to stand your ground, and it's one of the scariest experiences, honestly. Like, it makes
Wow.
you really question, like, why am I out here doing this right now? But at the same time, once it's done, you're like, well, that was cool. I didn't die, but so sorry. As far as distance though, it depends on the photo, but sometimes I'll be within 15 feet of these bears. And the biggest thing is, it's not me approaching them. So there's a big difference between, people hear that kind of distance sometimes and they're like, what are you doing? You can't go up to animals like that. And it's like, well, to get some of these shots, it's more about hunkering down, sitting, laying, whatever, making yourself seem small and just like not a concern for them. And then, the rivers will wind up and they'll just kind of come down the creek. And that's when you get those like magic moments. Because as a photographer with wildlife as well, the biggest thing that I like to photograph is not an altered behavior. I don't like a faked emotion or faked behavior. I like really getting to see them just doing what they do and on a normal day, instead of being like, oh, there's a person there, I need to act different, or I'm aware, like afraid of you, or something like that. So waiting, and then they just end up coming by you, and your heart starts racing a little as they get super close, and then they kind of pass you by, and then it's okay.
Man, so have you had to like study these animals to understand about them before, or is it all just experiential?
It's a little bit of both. Studying helps a lot, like especially when you're learning different types of or times a year to go see them. Like right now, it gets a little bit, I don't want to say sketchy, but it is sketchier for sure. If I were to go look for bears right now, they're in hyperphagia, which is when they just are eating like 20 hours a day. They're just eating, getting ready for hibernation, and it's a big process for them, and they get really hungry. So like, I wouldn't really go looking for bears much past this time, just because they are a little bit more agitated. And then also flip side of that is, come springtime, they're coming out of hibernation. The big male boars are coming out first, and they're hungry from hibernation. So you kind of don't want to be caught out in the woods by yourself in like Tetons or Yellowstone necessarily in like March. Even though the snow might be kind of starting to melt, you just don't want to really be out there alone because they are waking up and they're hungry. So studying helps that kind of scenario, but I will say probably I'd say 75% of what I've learned has come from just being out with them, honestly. I like reading and learning in that scenario, but I'm much more of a hands-on learner, if that makes sense. So getting out there. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. So I'm trying to create a visual in my mind. Like, so for bears in particular, most of your shoots are in Alaska. Is that right?
Most of them, yeah. I do have some bears, and not a ton of bears, but like bears, moose, and stuff in Teton, Yellowstone. Wolves are mainly in Yellowstone that I photographed, and then like foxes and stuff are kind of all
Yeah.
over the place. But yeah, bears are mainly Alaska.
Yeah. So when you're on a shoot, are you alone? And like, talk to me about like what that kind of a trip looks like. Or are you camping? Are you, yeah.
Sure, sure. So sometimes I'm alone. Sometimes I'm alone, like when I'm not in a like so for instance, this last summer in August here of 24, a couple buddies of mine and we just went out and we flew into Lake Clark. You have to find like a pilot that can take you over there and just drop you off on the beach. Essentially, we have our camping gear, like our tents, food, bear containers. That's food's in bear containers. You make a separate campsite for all your food, and then you put like a little electrified bear fence around it. And I really mean little electrified. It's like a piece of wire that runs around it, and it gives them a little shock if they sniff it. So then they usually are supposed to be deterred. But stuff like that, and then you make your campsite separate with another little bear fence around it, like really nothing fancy. And so that's more of a time where I go out with the buddies, and like that's what we love to do. But a lot of the time, and more often than not, I would say like where my big exploration comes in is when I'm like by myself, and I'll just either bike up a trail as far as I can, then walk as much as I can. And then other times just, you'll hike miles and miles and miles with, I got 70 pounds of gear with all my camera equipment, and I'm just hoping to find something. You get on like a trail, and then you're just out there alone. Those are the scarier moments, because, there's been instances where I've run into like, moose during the rut where a male was interested in a female and she had a calf, and it was a big dynamic that I was newer to photographing, and some scary moments with that. So you have to be very careful. You hear like thumps in the ground, you're like, you got to just have your head on a swivel at all times alone. But when you're with people, you kind of get that extra eyes on it. So
totally. But like what you just described, I mean, I'm envisioning you're kind of almost sort of backpacking, right? You're camping, and you have all your camera equipment and everything. So you're like out there alone. I mean, talk to me about like the emotions that you experience on those kinds of trips.
Like it's a lot of fatigue by that trip was like a week long, and I was like 3 days in. We were hiking about, not hiking on this one because it was more coastal. We just walked the coast, but we would walk 12, 13 miles a day. Sometimes that was like the higher end, sometimes like 8 miles a day, but you were really like almost always at double digit mileage for the day with all this gear while your campsite was back. And so you get tired, you get hungry, you get, but the biggest things that overcome everything is like, there'll be a day where you're going all over and you don't find a single thing. And then that night, something would happen and you'd come across like these animals, like the bears doing whatever. And like one night we had like it was our longest day, and we came out to the area we had been coming to, hoping that the salmon would start running. And there ended up being, by the time we left the night, we counted like 14 or 15 bears we got to like photograph and interact with. And like, it was an amazing night. So that whole night we're just walking, 3 miles back to camp in the dark. And we're just like, I can't believe that just happened. Like, what an amazing night. So it's overwhelming excitement, with that. So
I love that. Overwhelming excitement. That's a great one. And that's kind of like the after, like, are there like anticipatory emotions that you experience, like fear or
not really fear as much, to be honest. Like we're all in really good spirits, and that's, I think that's a huge thing of being out there, is you can't go into it with like an over, like, you want to have a sense of, be realistic, like, oh, this could happen. But I never like go into a scenario like that with fear. It's because fear is contagious. Also, the animals, if you're working with big animals that are, very sensitive to that fear comes off to them. They see confidence. It's just like reading another person, like you can tell if someone's more reserved and fearful of a situation as opposed to someone that's more confident with it. And that comes out to nature photography and wildlife as well, just because they see that more than you think. They sense a lot more than we think.
Yeah. Can you tell us the moose story?
The moose story. Which one?
The one you were talking about when you came upon a moose and I think there was a bull and then a female.
Yeah, so that's my most memorable for sure. I was just making sure.
Yeah.
So that one was I was out in Denali National Park, and Denali National Park, if you haven't been, or for those who haven't been, a lot of it is you're almost encouraged to hike just wherever off trail. You want to get permits and stuff for certain trails or backcountry, but a lot of it is like you take this bus in, and I would tell a bus driver like, hey, stop here. And then I would just get out of the bus on this long, 20 miles stretch of road. And I would just start walking into the woods. I'm sure people thought I was insane. But there was Dall sheep, which are like bighorn sheep, but they're all white. And they were up on this mountain. So I got out of the bus and I just beelined it towards them up this mountain, just on a game trail. Like there's no actual foot trails around for like pedestrians or people. And it's just game trails you're following and you're just kind of going in the direction. So I got up there and I got some amazing photos of them. It was amazing day, like beautiful weather for being Alaska in September. So that was beautiful. But then on the way back down, I came down and I was like, you're in bear country. So there's grizzlies everywhere in the middle of Denali. And then there's moose everywhere. And it being September, it's the rut where the males are out chasing females and trying to mate and all that. And they fight each other. But the bulls, because of this time of year, they're much more aggressive. Not that bulls are aggressive inherently, really. They're more, what's the word? I'm trying to think. I'll come back to that part. But anyway, they're not aggressive. They're on a different wavelength that time of year. And anyway, so I was photographing this mom and her cub, and not her cub, sorry, her calf. And I was photographing them, and then I saw the male kind of come into the picture, big male, huge rack. And this bull was on this female, but I was like, okay, I can get some good photos. So I kept my distance because I have my big lens out and I'm in the middle of trees. So you can't really when you have a big lens, you got to get distance or you got to switch to a small lens in trees like that. And anyway, I'm photographing the mom and she, like the calf's kind of off to my right. And then she kind of runs up to the calf and I'm photographing her. And then all of a sudden, while I'm photographing her, I hear just, dun, 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 just like running. And I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about the bull for a second. So the bull is chasing her. And I have luckily a pine tree, like a big pine tree right in front of me, essentially. And I was kind of photographing down an angle. And then once they got in front of me, this bull just stopped on the other side of this tree, like 5 feet from this bull. And it was like, that was one of the scariest because like, I didn't want to move fast, nor did I want to. Like, if you run, like, you better be good at zigzagging and find some trees to like block it. But like, you don't really want to run from anything for the most part, unless it's actually a moose chasing you and you're like, okay, well, I don't have a choice. But anyway, this bull just stopped there and I froze. He stood there for like 3 to 5 minutes, and not even exaggeration, like 3 to 5 minutes. I had my hand on my camera at my chest, like thinking of like, what do I need to zip up if I need to take off running? And I just stood there and he just stood, and it kind of turned into this, it was fearful at first. And then it just turned into like, wow, because he knew I was there. Like, they know you're there.
Ask you that question. Yeah.
They know you're there. They just don't want to startle him is the big thing. And it turned from a fearful moment in the first couple minutes to that last couple minutes where it was like I feel like I just connected with it, which is maybe sounds crazy, but
it's awesome. I want to hear about that. Yeah.
No, it's just, I had a view right of its eye, like, it's one eye on the side of its head. And I just was able to look into it and like, it's one thing to photograph and like zoom into the photo later, but it's another to be like within that type of distance of like seeing all the little pieces of fur around the eye, the coloration in the fur. It's like seeing it up close and personal with a truly, wow, this is the middle of Denali. This isn't an animal. This is a moose that avoids people. It's off the roadway. So it's not like moose that are around towns. It's a very different experience. And then it walked off. And it was like that moment was over, but it was like one of those lasting moments where like, I will never forget. Yeah.
Was your camera involved in that 5-minute period, or were you just sitting there watching him?
I was just holding it. No, I was too close. I didn't want to move at all. I literally froze and just held my camera like up to my chest. Cause if I needed to run, I was like, I got to keep it tight. Like, I got to make sure I have everything. Yeah. And then, I froze and just watched it at that point. And it's one of those moments, those are the moments too, that like, you think that we're photographing the whole time, but there's a lot of times where like it gets to a point either late in the night where you can't photograph anymore or whatever. And then you just, it's a whole other type of experience when you just put the camera down and then you're just with nature, like in nature. And then it becomes like a whole other thing. So,
oh man.
Yeah,
It's very suspenseful. That's great. I love that story. I was feeling that.
Yeah.
So Kristoff, you shared with me a couple of weeks ago when we first talked that there's a few different animals that you really like to shoot, and you mentioned bear, Arctic fox, and wolves. And I'm curious if you could just kind of take us through each one of those, and kind of maybe you could tell us a little bit about each one of those animals, and maybe what the the photography experience is like and how it differs with each one.
Yeah. So bears, I mean, we've talked a lot about bears today. I love their silly nature, kind of, like it's truly, when you watch these families, it's really like, it's like watching family, like it's watching a sitcom sometimes. So photographing these bears, like, I've gotten a couple of times where like the bears will be fighting, and like that's a whole other experience, like seeing these bears. But the only big fights I've actually caught where I felt like, oh, this is kind of crazy, was like from a very far distance, and like two bears were like fighting over fish, and they were two big males, and it was like a pretty cool experience. But I was far enough away to be like, I didn't have to be scared being right next to them.
Sure, yeah.
So that's like bears. I love watching that type of dynamic.
Well, and before you move off of bears, because the last time we spoke, you told me about like, again, coming back to like bears in certain places in Alaska being a little bit more familiar with humans. And you kind of talked about like one experience that you had with a mama and her cubs, and her almost like using you as a babysitter.
Yeah. Actually, so Lake Clark, there's a lodge there, and it's called Silver Salmon Creek Lodge, and it's the bears. There's some lodges that are set up on Lake Clark, and that's why some of the bears in those areas are much more, they're used to people, so they're a lot more chill around people. So I'll fly in and I'll camp near kind of that area. But anyway, this sow had her two cubs, and they were first year cubs. So like I was there in August of 23, and they were born probably around, like in the like early part of 2024. I don't know what month, obviously, but like in that area. So they were very young, like 7 months old, 6-7 months old. And, it was funny. She would go to fish, and there would be like us, my buddy and I, who were camping. And then there would be like a group from the lodge, maybe out there, like kind of hanging out. And even if it wasn't a group, like it just people in general, she would literally just like let them hang out, and they would come right up to us and like walk past us. And like, you could almost like, there were moments where I have like, there's a couple of photos I have where it looks like I should be on my like 400 millimeter, which is my huge lens, but I'm actually on like a way shorter lens. And it's just that close to me that it kept walking, and then it walked past, like to the point where I could have reached and just like pet it, essentially. Wow. And it was hard not to pet it, I'll be honest. But that's, again, you touch it, it freaks out, and then mom will come over. Yeah. So you just don't do that.
For those listening, don't do that.
Don't ever do that. Yeah, like never do that. But anyway, yeah, she would like almost treat us like babysitters. Like she would just like go fish, like, over the hill and kind of down by the river. And these cubs would just play and walk around us and like just do all sorts of stuff. But it was, on the flip side of that, it seems all like, wow, that's so chill. But they got the two little cubs got into it over like a fish carcass, like bones of a fish. And the mom, like she got up to speed fast, and she was over to the cubs in like a split second. She barreled through. Like if the group of people that was there hadn't split, she would have run them down to get to her cubs. Like she wasn't turning. So like this group had to split to like, it was like watching someone part the sea, to like get through. Yeah. And she just, the people moved, and she got to the cubs. And then just once she found out it was nothing, she just left them again and went back to fishing. But like, it's one of those things, like they can move a lot faster than we can. They can accelerate a lot faster. So always say never pet a bear.
That's amazing. I love that story.
It's a good one.
So Arctic fox and wolves.
Yeah. So Arctic fox, I I had been wanting to photograph them because I photographed plenty of red fox in my time, because in Colorado, you can find them in a lot of urban areas, no problem. But I was in Iceland this summer for the first time, and I've been wanting to go there to photograph puffins. And I photographed puffins in Alaska, but like Iceland was like, I've wanted to go see the waterfalls, the landscape, everything is just beautiful there. Anyway, the whole hunt not hunt, but like the search I was on was to find puffins and Arctic foxes were the two things I like went to Iceland for. And we spent the whole 5 days we were there just driving the ring road to try to find like where the best spots might be. So I got the puffins out of the way, and I love photographing puffins. They're one of my favorite birds to photograph for sure, just because they're hilarious too. But the Arctic fox, on the last day, or the day before we flew out, we got to this section, and we had been just, I was exhausted. I think I had gotten sick, and it was just like a lot, because we were just staying up for like so many hours driving, and I would maybe sleep for like 4 or 5 hours, if that, just so we can make this road. Because by the time you get out to the other end of the island, you're like, oh, we got to get all the way back to Reykjavik. Like, it's a whole thing. So anyway, the second to last day, we get to this area, and I'm like, I'm kind of like, you feel defeated. You're like, okay, no Arctic fox, but I got great puffins, and this has all been beautiful. Like, I don't have any complaints or regrets. I did everything I possibly could. And then I was driving, and we were actually going to look for a spot to park our car to take a nap, because we were exhausted. And this is like late afternoon now, evening. And, I see this, like, it looks like a prairie dog. Like, I don't know if you have prairie dogs near you, but like in Colorado, we have prairie dogs. They're just like, So this little thing runs across the road. And I was like, that's like, Arctic foxes are way bigger than that. Like, there's no way. But then it just ran different. I was like, all right, I'm going to pull off. And so I pulled out my camera, pulled off on the side of this road. And it was like an old lava field that was all covered in like tundra. So it was all very like, it was covered in mosses and all sorts of different type of like small flowers. And it had lots of little valleys. And I get my camera out, and this little thing happens to pop out, and I get it in my camera. And I'm like, oh my God, that's an Arctic fox kit, which is like a baby. Like, these are baby Arctic fox. And so it was one. And then I just we parked down the road a little bit. And then I just kind of kept it in my sights and walked like a far distance away, but kind of walked with it just to see if I could follow it back to its den, and then get different opportunities, maybe with, mom and dad, or, a sibling or whatever. Finally get out there. The biggest thing I want to be careful is like, you have to be really careful, because too many people know what you're doing out there. You like, they'll either come out, and then they can ruin that whole experience. So it was very like, I had to pretend like I didn't have my camera. Like, I had to kind of like pretend I was on a trail kind of thing, which I was on like a bit of a trail, but it was hard to tell. And it wasn't like a known trail really.
Sure.
Anyway, I get out there, and then this little kit fox pops up, and then it's got a little sibling, and they are playing and like walking around. One of them is definitely more confident than the other. You can definitely tell. But yeah, I never got photographs of mom and dad, but like, just getting that, like, they're so curious. So like, unlike the bears where you get these like crazy family dynamics, you can get them with foxes, no problem. Like, it's just, you got to find the right family. Yeah. But with this, it's just the curiosity aspect of foxes is so fun. It's kind of like watching a cat figure out like what the jingly mouse thing is, like when you're playing with like a little kitten or something. It's that type of like fun, cute little experience.
Oh, I love it, man. Yeah, that's so fun.
Yeah, super fun. And then wolves are, I have huskies, so I'm a big, like, I love that look. I've always wanted huskies, and I've always loved wolves. Like, that was like my childhood like animal, was like, I love wolves. Like, that's my favorite animal. And when I started photographing when I started really getting into wildlife in 2020, I went to Yellowstone, and it was shut down during the winter time. So there was like myself, maybe like 10 other photographers there, and then maybe 5 other visitors you might run into randomly. But it was so quiet during the shutdown that, I got to go out, and the wolves were coming right up to the roads. There'd be a dead bison in an area. They'd be feeding, like, you name it. I got videos of like a hunt, like a chase where wolves are chasing down bison. I got them chasing down elk in some photos, like really cool moments that it's hard to see from, like, usually it's happening way out and you need a spotting scope, but these were like relatively close to the road because the park had been so empty during COVID. So it was a really unique time to be in that ecosystem. And my first day in the park, I drove in the night before in a blizzard, had no idea where I was. Like, it was my first time ever to Yellowstone. I just like parked and camped, and I woke up and my van had so much snow on it. And I was just like, okay, this is going to be crazy, because it hadn't snowed yet either. So I came in with green grass, not green grass, but like yellow grass everywhere. And then the next morning it was like a foot of snow had dropped.
Wow.
So it was a crazy like morning. So I got up and at it like early, like before sunrise, drove into the park to this area. Like, I had, again, no idea what part of the park these wolves were going to be. And I just happened to luck out where these wolves crossed the road, like in front of me at this one area. And it was, if people know Yellowstone, it's Tower Junction, but there's like a ranger station there in that area. And these wolves just crossed, and I got them all kind of one at a time, kind of coming up. And then they went off behind the hill, and then they howled. And it was like, oh, like that was like,
and that was completely luck, is what you're telling me?
Most wildlife is, honestly, wildlife is about luck.
Well, I mean, I don't, I guess I don't think I can say I've ever actually seen a wild wolf, but when I was in the boundary waters of Minnesota, we were out in the middle of nowhere, and you could hear them. I mean,
oh yeah,
a lot of them. I mean, it wasn't just, it wasn't one or two. Like, I heard this pack of wolves, and there had to have been 25 or 30 of them by the sounds of the howling.
They get loud.
Yeah. But awesome. I mean, what we learned a little bit from the rangers is that they don't want to be seen. So, I guess it's just the time of year that you were there. Like, that's amazing.
The Yellowstone wolves are, again, different because they are used to people. So they're less afraid of the roadways, to the point where, they're the rangers have to like haze them off sometimes, where they'll like shoot beanbags kind of at them and stuff to like, don't come on near the road, because we don't want them getting hit by cars, is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And also there's a lot of animosity towards wolves, and it's a sad hatred of them. There's a lot of stuff that we don't have to go into unless you want to, that I could talk about that side of it, why I'm so big on wolves and conservation. But outside of the park, they're not protected. So the biggest reason they actually haze them away from roadways and people is so that when they cross that park border, they don't go up to people, because people outside of the park are like ruthless, and they will like trap them in snares and run them down with snowmobiles. Like, that level of, it's very, very sad. Like, the hatred that some people have towards these wolves, and there's not a reason, because you see them, and this is what I try to capture, is like, you see them playing, and it's literally like, it's exactly like watching my 3 dogs play with each other. Like, it's to that level where like they grab each other's neck fur, and they're like, they're scuffing, they're wrestling and all this stuff, and then they get up and they're fine. Like, they're just like, they're like dogs, which is why we domesticated them. But they're just dogs that are in the wild, and people really hate them. So we want to make sure that they don't go out of the park boundary and think people are safe, because they're not usually outside of the park. So
that makes sense. All right. So you open the door, like take me into that a little bit deeper.
Well, I don't know how dark you want to get in, like dark and deep, because obviously I don't want to like, it can be very upsetting, and people can do their own research. But there's a whole case that just happened recently where there's videos that were posted of a guy that taped a wolf's mouth shut and brought it into a bar in Wyoming, and traipsed it around the bar like it was a toy. And it had a broken leg because he had run it down with his snowmobile, and like all this crazy, like this type of like, it's like evil. I mean, it really is evil stuff. And there's videos of like them chasing wolves and coyotes on like big open basins, like in their snowmobiles, and they'll just run them over multiple times until the animal's too like weak, and they'll just run it over. They'll beat them with baseball bats. Like, it's really messed up stuff. So like,
wow.
Without going more into detail, people can do their own research on that. And it's heartbreaking. Like, there's killing contests for how many can you line up. Like, there's stuff like that in Nebraska for coyotes and foxes, where they just run them down on ATVs and baseball bat them to death. So I don't, we won't go much more into that.
Actually, I mean, it's good awareness for listeners. I mean, honestly, like, it brings a lot more meaning to this idea that you're like, on your website, it says you're trying to tell a story to protect wildlife. And I think like, it just brought a lot of stuff together for me, because like, just even the bears, like, I'm looking at these pictures of the bears, and the way that you shoot these bears, like, I see the personality.
Yeah. You could see it. Exactly. That's the beauty
Yeah.
of it.
So I do
Yeah.
understand. And actually, I mean, I appreciate that level to be able to kind of to bring that together.
Yeah.
Um, so where I'm curious, like, this is all pretty new for you, like just started doing the photography thing in 2019. Where did your adventure spirit come from?
That came from, I would say, my parents, but also like an experience kind of within that. So, my parents were big travelers. I grew up in Minnesota. I lived in Colorado while I was young, Florida, Australia. My dad was Australian. So we tried to live there a couple different times and then back to Minnesota. Then I built out a bus and moved to North Carolina for a year. And then I ended up back in Colorado here in 2019. So I've been like all around the country a lot because my parents like to travel. But before all the moving as an adult, I was doing like I was in a band and
Yeah.
touring, and I really fell in love with just like it was so fun to like go experience new places and like different cities and different people from those places. So it was really fun. And then what happened was, let's see, I was in those bands around 2016. Then I started building up the first school bus and started building that to adventure in. And then a few months after buying that, actually, my father passed away. And it was one of those things where I know he was a traveler, obviously, like they took us everywhere. And it was a big moment because he was so stressed about working and life and like paying the bills. And he was saving this money to be able to go out and travel more again. And then he passed away at 65 or 66. Yeah, 66 before even getting to retire and like use that money.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was a huge thing in my life. Like that changed how I started spending my money. Changed, like, instead of, I was working in car sales at that time while I was building out this school bus, and I was getting ready to quit that job and like move out in the school bus and like travel the country and just use whatever savings I had. And I ended up saving that money, but it changed from like, instead of, a lot of people in that industry, and that's just how it is, kind of like going to nice dinners and stuff like that. And I was not always really that big on like spending a ton of money on dinners and stuff like that and like the one-time experiences, but I ended up starting to save my money to just travel, like to travel. And I was actually just talking about this with a coworker the other day at another job I'm at, but he was talking about like, oh yeah, like going out to dinner and all this stuff, and like told me what he likes to spend. I'm like, oh, you'll never see me spend that much money on a dinner. Like I'll just never spend that money, because when I go to like a town, he's like, I like to experience like the town and the city. And I'm like, oh no, more power to you. Just me personally, I'd rather make that money take me farther from the city center, if that makes sense. So rather than spend it in the middle of a city, I like to use that money. So I'll go like out to restaurants in Alaska or wherever I am, but they're just run-in-the-mill restaurants, local little places, and I can go out and go to like into Denali. I can afford that flight over to like Clark now because I didn't spend it on a dinner,
Yeah.
And it's like to that level where I changed my spending habits to be just that type of stuff.
No, it totally makes sense. I mean, it's kind of like valuing experience over things, right?
Yeah, kind of. It definitely is like it changed that, like hardcore. And I'm not a very material person, like in the first place. I like, that's fine, but it's that was like a dramatic moment in my life that completely changed how I live, and yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you started converting the bus in 2016 and then
Mhm.
dad passed away in 2017.
Yep,
Um, like there obviously was like this sort of sense of adventure kind of building inside of you. And
for sure.
I'm curious, like before he passed, like was he connected with any part of the experience of building the bus?
Oh yeah, I mean, he's what, my dad was a big car guy, so that's what got me into being a technician in the first place at Audi. Was
Yeah.
like we had cars that he would do stuff on, and I got into like installing radios, and I just started loving working on them. And my dad's dad, so my grandpa's on my dad's side, he had they had a furniture store in Australia. So like my dad grew up building furniture and like working with woodworking. So buying this bus was like it was a really cool double-sided story. Like I was able to like work on the bus, and then my dad was helping me like, he was putting in AutoCAD, like how to do the layout for me, like based on a grid, it's based on the square footage. And it was really fun. Like I was trying to involve him as much as I could. And then it just randomly, he had a stroke one day. And that was like the beginning of the end. After a few weeks, he just couldn't pull out of it, and it just ended there. But it was very big. Like the woodworking side of it, I love building out. Like I love that, and that comes from my dad's side for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool story. I mean, it almost feels like you're kind of carrying that legacy forward.
Yeah. No, it's I try to, at least, you know what I mean? And my mom's a huge thing too for me, because the big conservation side of me comes from my mom for sure. Like my dad loved animals and stuff, but like my mom was always donating to so many like wildlife, nonprofits, and I like trying to do she was always big on like organic foods and all this stuff, just to like protect the environment, really. So my mom's a huge like environmentalist person. And so all of that is like where I get that side from. So it's like, it's this hodgepodge of like, I can pretty much trace exactly like certain characteristics to like one of my parents, like without a doubt.
It's so cool though, that you said like that you can literally trace those things. And it's like, kind of brings me sort of like, the last thing I wanted to sort of chat with you about was this path that you've chosen for yourself. Like, it seems like you're so plugged into nature, conservation, wildlife. And I'm just curious, like, how those things sort of bring meaning to who you are and in your life.
I mean, they built up for so many years, and I saw it growing up, and it was kind of ingrained in me. And now having that ability to capture and tell the story, instead of being like completely internalized to like our family, I feel like I've taken what they kind of had in mind and been able to expand it to like reach a bigger audience, and to protect it. And like, that's, again, at the end of the day, like, if there's one thing above all that I'm in wildlife photography for, it's protecting it. I love when I get these beautiful shots, and social media is fun and it's cool getting likes and stuff. But if at the end of the day, like, that could sway someone's opinion from like hating an animal to loving it, or like to like inspire someone younger that's working in the conservation side too, to like get into it more, like if that's what it takes, like that, I think that's such a cool, like, above all, that's what I really want. That's my goal with my photography, is to do that.
Well, speaking of inspiration and sharing, one of the things that you're starting to get more and more into is guiding other people.
Yeah, guiding. And again, it's kind of specifically more photography guiding rather than showing and talking about, because showing and talking about is fun. But again, if you can bring people with their cameras to take those same type of photos and get their network to see and change their mindset, that's a huge thing. So guiding I just did my first guiding trip with my buddy Sergis Hannon. He's a great photographer up in Alaska. And he does a lot of guiding with, random different companies, and himself solo, like it's really kind of all over the place. But he invited me along to be a second guide alongside him. And, he's one of the people I went out on that camping trip with in August. So he knows that I understand how to read the animals, which is big when you have a group of people that's relying on you to protect them essentially with these animals. So guiding is a big thing. I'm working on a workshop or guiding workshop in Iceland, actually, next summer, hopefully. So I'm going to try to get that going and to photograph puffins and Arctic fox, hopefully. But definitely more of a puffin trip. So
that's amazing though. So like, if people want to learn more about you or be guided by you on one of these trips, how do they do that?
So my Instagram's like the quickest way to find me. It's Kristoff, Kristoff Druva Wildlife, Kristoff Druva Wildlife. And my website is Kristoff Druva Photography. So if you want the website, and I'm sure it'll all be posted and everything like that. But Instagram's the quickest way to connect with me though.
Great. So there we can find some inspiration just through your photography, but also can connect with you and potentially work with you to be guided on one of these journeys.
Absolutely.
How else can people like get involved with you or help you?
Honestly, I mean, everything, these trips cost money. So scouting them out always is one of those things that costs money. I do sell prints on my website. So if you hop on my website, or if you see a photo on my Instagram or anything like that interests you, shoot me a message or contact me out, or you can purchase straight up on the website. Holiday gifts, I'm doing calendars for a puffin calendar this year. So just kind of whatever floats your boat. I'm happy to talk more about that.
So cool. Well, I don't know if I'll ever be a photographer, but I would love to follow you around and witness some of the wildlife experiences that you're
Absolutely.
shooting. That is super cool. So I hope that we get to do that at some point. I mean,
Definitely.
man, like just the bears and the Arctic fox and the puffins and the wolves and all of these amazing experiences that you've had. Kristoff, at some point, Hollywood is going to pick up on you. And,
That would be awesome.
they're going to want to make a movie about you. And I want to know when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you in your movie?
So it's funny that you say that, because I was thinking about that question, and when you brought up Into the Wild, that's a huge inspiration. That book and movie were a huge inspiration. So I can't remember that actor's name for the life of me. But is it Emil?
Emil Hirsch.
Emil
Yep,
Hirsch, right? Okay.
that's right.
So I think that would be a great
Love it.
actor, because it just fits, and it's kind of like that would be a dream. Like, oh, the guy that like inspired me in the movie kind of like do the bus thing. That's what inspired the bus side of me, actually. And then that's who I would probably pick.
What's your movie going to be called?
This is Wildlife.
This is Wildlife, starring Emil Hirsch. Love it.
There we go. I think something like that. That's all I could. I'm not a good namer of stuff.
That's awesome, man. What a fun conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really appreciate it. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Kristoff's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Kristoff, thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me, Scott. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate it.